A haunting melody echoes from a forgotten attic. Then silence. Welcome to Detective Noir. I am your host, Daniel Mercer. I love seeing this community grow. Tell me where you're tuning in from today. Your comments mean the world to me. I always love reading them. Let's begin. It was upon a bleak March evening, the sort that strews a fine soot upon one's cuffs and persuades the most resolute flaneur to hurry past the river's draught, that Holmes turned from the window of our Baker Street rooms and, without preface, remarked that the Italian across the way would not keep his lodgings long if he persisted in boiling chestnuts with the sash so low. "You have observed, Watson," said he, "that his lamp burns higher after 9 and that curious bloom upon the upper pane? Turpentine in the Polish, chestnuts in the pot, and a landlord's complaint to follow. He will be in the street by the week's end." I had in truth observed nothing save the smear of rain and the occasional umbrella fleeing down the pavement. I was about to answer in the defensive, tone that long practice renders almost good-humored, when Mrs. Hudson entered, with a card upon a tray and that particular look of reined-in indignation, which foretold either a muddy boot upon her stair or an unexpected visitor at a late. "Our Mr. Edwin Markham, sir. He is very urgent." And as Mrs. Hudson's lips pinched upon the final word, "An instrument case. Show him in," said Holmes. The gentleman who crossed our threshold carried a narrow, black case which, by its length and the suppleness of the leather, I took for a violin. He was of middle years, pale of cheek with that dusky pallor which comes from working more with ink than with air. The heavy fur collar of his coat had been hastily buttoned. Drops of rain clung there like dull beads. A greying moustache, neatly trimmed, did little to conceal the tremor of his mouth, Mr. Holmes. "Dr. Watson?" His eye travelled between us with a species of desperation that made me motion him quickly to the fire. "My name is Edwin Markham. I beg your pardon for the hour, but a matter of the gravest singularity and danger has arisen at my house in Bloomsbury. I was told," he swallowed, "I was told you were the only man in London who could hear what others do not." Holmes's long fingers steepled beneath his chin. "You flatter me, Mr. Markham. Pray set down your case. You are a widower of 2 years, I see, a lecturer in the history of music at King's College. You write with your left hand but bow with your right. You have not been sleeping, and your house possesses an attic you have not willingly entered in some days. The astonishment that overtook our visitor might have been comic had not his anxiety been so real." "It is true. How could you possibly—" "Your card tells me much. Your cuff and fingers tell me more," Holmes murmured. "The chalk at your right thumb speaks of the blackboard rather than the violin, and the ink on the left forefinger shows where a left-handed man corrects proofs. The bow callus at the base of the right index is not a musician's affectation. As for your sleep," he leaned forward, "the purple smudge beneath the eye is of the sort produced by a pillow seldom used, and your collar was buttoned in haste by imperfect eyes in a dark passage. You smell faintly of resin, but not of your own. Lastly, and here is the point that brings you to us, there is attic dust upon the hem of your coat and a flake of dried varnish upon your cuff, broader than any that would fall from an instrument conscientiously kept. You have an attic, Mr. Markham, and something in it has not permitted you peace." Markham gripped the violin case as though it were a reliquary. "It is not a something, Mr. Holmes. It is a sound." He glanced at me, and I confess that a cold curiosity stirred my own spine. "A sound," said Holmes. "Describe it with the precision of a metronome. It began 3 nights since at 1:45. A violin, a single line of melody, very soft, as if cautious, as if played by one who feared to wake a child, drifted down from our uppermost room. It was not my instrument. I keep mine in the parlour, and it has not been tuned these past weeks. The attic, Mr. Holmes, has been closed since my wife died. We never went up there. There is nothing but old trunks and—" He broke off, forcing his voice to steadiness, "and her music stand." Holmes did not move. "You did not go up the first night, no." I told myself it was the wind in the eaves, though there was no wind or a cat upon the roof. The second night the melody returned, the same 8 measures, but more certain, and after it ceased there came the faintest scrape, not of a bow upon a string, but of a chair leg or a foot. "Tonight," he drew a shuddering breath, "tonight the tune altered. It called my name." Holmes's eyes, which had been half-lidded with contemplation, opened in their keenest fashion. "Your name softly, not spoken, but there in the phrasing, as if the notes shaped the syllables, Markham. It is a common figure in certain laments, but my wife— He pressed his knuckles to his mouth. My wife used it when she teased me from my study. She wrote a little air of her own, nothing publishable, and she would draw out the second syllable with that exact fall upon the dominant. You believe, then, that the air is hers? I do not believe in ghosts. Mr. Holmes, he said with a miserable candor, I believe in hands and bows and men who break locks. My attic door stands locked from the landing, and the key lies in my pocket. Yet someone, or something, has been in that room. Tonight, after the sound ceased, I went up as far as the landing with a candle. The key turned tight in the lock, stiff as if it had not moved in years. When I opened the door, forgive me, I could not cross the threshold. There was a smell, resin. Yes, but also to a sharper odor, like tallow scorched upon metal. Holmes's fingers began their delicate tapping upon the arm of his chair. You brought your instrument. Why? Because I thought you might wish to compare strings or rosin. I do not know. Mr. Holmes, I snatched it up as a man snatches a stick against a burglar. Holmes rose with that particular abruptness which sends energy like a charge through a room. Your address, Mr. Markham? Number 15, Coram Street, Bloomsbury. We shall go at once. Watson, your overcoat. Mrs. Hudson, if the Italian across the way should inquire for me, tell him that chestnuts prefer an open window. The rain, which had beaten a tattoo on the panes, met us in a fine, needling sheet as we hailed a hansom, and rattled eastward through the sodden glare of gas and the glimmer of closed shop fronts. London at that hour possesses a different pulse, a sort of muffled thudding beneath the cobbles that belongs to night porters and night watchmen and those whose errands fear the sun. Markham sat forward, the violin case upon his knees like a child held too tightly, while Holmes's face, quite stripped of its languor, wore that hawk-like stillness which presaged a hunt. Coram Street presented a respectable facade of brick, its iron railings slick and dark with rain. Markham's house was narrow but kept in good order. A fanlight over the door cast a dim oval upon the step. Inside, the lamps were turned low in consideration of economy and nerves. A narrow stair climbed at once from the hall, and upon its lowest riser lay a scatter of pale grit such as collects where disused passages are stirred. Holmes stooped, touched the grit and brought his finger to his nose. Attic dust but recent. It yields to the damp. Observe, Watson, the heel mark upon the third stair. Mr. Markham, no one else resides with you. My maid, Mrs. Keene, sleeps out. She comes mornings. I am alone. Locks. Front door 2 turns. Attic, as I have said. The parlour has a French window to the small yard, but it is bolted. The kitchen door is chained from within. Holmes nodded, mounted. At the first landing he paused before a small table upon which stood a candlestick. He leaned, and with the nail of his right forefinger lifted the merest thread, translucent and faintly gleaming. Shellac, said he softly, a violinist's friend, but on a candlestick that never held a bow. And here he moved with a peculiar delicacy along the wall, a smear upon the plaster at shoulder height, and, if I do not deceive myself, the faintest bloom of rosin in the air. Do you keep your case upon the upper floors, Mr. Markham? In the parlour cupboard, always. We gained the topmost landing. The door to the attic stood at the end of a short passage. Markham took from his pocket a key of old iron and placed it with a tremor into Holmes's hand. Holmes examined it in the gaslight, then knelt to peer at the keyhole. He sniffed. Tallow indeed, and a trifle of lampblack. The edge of the plate shows the scratch of a pick. But he turned the key and the lock admitted it with a stiff protest. Note the resistance. A man may open a lock without the key, Mr. Markham, but he cannot persuade the tumblers to grow stiff again for his deception. The door swung inward upon a room large enough to have lodged a servant in earlier days. Its ceiling sloped and its air motionless. The beam of our candle revealed a journey of dust, broken by islands where trunks and boxes rose like dark boulders. In one corner, beneath the half-moon of a small window crusted white with the breath of winter, there stood a wooden chair and, as Markham had said, a folding music stand of cheap japanned metal. Upon the chair lay a single object, and when the light fell upon it, I confess that something like astonishment escaped me. It was a violin string, the E coiled upon itself, like a shed serpent's skin, and stained near the knot with a minute crescent of brown. Holmes did not touch it. He cocked his head, and for a moment we three men stood in that high, quiet place like figures in a daguerreotype, listening not with our ears, but with some foolish hope in the bone. The city's murmur came, thickened by roof and rain. There was no other sound. "Do not be alarmed, Mr. Markham," said Holmes at last in a voice so gentle that even the dust seemed to relax. "There is nothing here that can harm you now. Watson, your candle, carefully along the sill, yes. Do you observe the inner face of the latch I leaned? Upon the iron was a faint greyed smear, as if a finger had trailed there and left powder. Near it the tiniest nodule of wax clung like a tear at the edge. Rosine, I said, uncertain. And wax, Holmes nodded. Our player prepared his string here, not days since, but tonight, for the brown upon the E is still tacky. The wax, a cheap taper. The droplet is fresh and has not gathered dust. Our man used light, though there is none within the attic to hand. He brought it. He shielded it. See how little soot marks the slant of the pane. And he stood thus back to the window and played. But how entered he? Cried Markham in a hoarse whisper. The door, the key. Holmes's gaze travelled to the small window. Its latch showed a recent brightness upon one side, and upon the dim crust of the glass there ran a delicate branching line, no thicker than a hair, like Frost's work, but in a different geometry. We shall not answer all questions upon the first step, said Holmes, but here are some we may pose with profit. Who in London plays with a light hand yet leaves his rosin upon candlesticks? Who knows a private air and the private way to a locked room? Who carries wax, and why choose the E string and not the lower? Above all, Mr. Markham, who benefits by your fear? He turned, and the lamplight caught the keen edge of his profile. Then, as if some hidden spring had been pressed, the sharpness softened, and he became again the languid lodger who discoursed upon chestnuts. We shall examine the yard and roof before the rain erases what the night preserved, said he. And tomorrow, if Scotland Yard is not already chasing a phantom down Holborn, we shall invite our old friend Lestrade to hear a song in daylight. He paused by the chair and, with the nail of his forefinger, lifted the abandoned string as one might raise a dangerous thread from cloth. He sniffed very slightly. Blue dye, he murmured, curious. There is more of Naples than London in that. Come, Watson. The night is young, and if I mistake not. The attic has not yet sung its last. Holmes moved like a cat along the passage, snuffed the candle with 2 fingers to preserve what odours the draught might spare us, and led the way down, holding the useless little spiral of E like a relic between nail and thumb. In the hall he bade Markham fetch his greatcoat and a lantern. He spoke softly, as a physician might in a ward after hours, yet with that undertone of purpose which permits no dawdling. The back door grated on its chain and then surrendered, and we stepped into a rectangle of wet brick, bounded by a low wall, a water butt, and the looming, soot-dark backs of neighbouring houses whose windows blinked like tired eyes under the rain. Your lantern low. Mr. Markham, and keep it steady, said Holmes. You see, Watson, how the water has pooled here, and how the run-off makes 2 tongues toward the drain. Footprints are poor scholars under such a master. Still they leave their blunders. He crouched, the lamplight drawing a pale aureole about the brim of his hat. Near the bottom of the downpipe a smear of something darker than wet metal clung in a crescent. Holmes touched it, rubbed finger and thumb, and then raised them to his nose, pitch roofer's friend, but fresh, and upon a spot the rain cannot reach except obliquely. Our man had help from the city itself. Give me the lantern. No, lower yet, thirsty along the mortar of the wall by the butt. The faintest nick where a ladder foot compressed and then shifted, not the householders. Mr. Markham owns no ladder, and Mrs. Keene would never permit one to scrape so near her washtub. The second foot fell against the water-butt's hoop. See the gleam where the iron is bared, and the drip that has washed a clean lip in the dirt below. A man came in over the wall with a ladder, placed it thus, then shifted it within the yard to the pipe and went up. He came down the same way. The second nick is deeper, for a descent is less nimble than an ascent when one carries weight. What weight? I asked, a conscience perhaps, but failing that, a small case. Markham's breath hissed through his teeth. A violin or the parts of one, Holmes answered. He will not always bring his own song. Sometimes he borrows it to ensure the voice matches the ear. And here, he angled the lantern up along the pipe. A pale gleam caught by the roughness. He extended a penknife, and upon its blade we saw a thread so slight I had taken it for a trick of wet metal, a filament, clear as glass, that quivered in the draught. "Catgut," Holmes murmured. "Not from a string entire. From a tailpiece lacing, or a bit trimmed near the peg. He has mended something in his haste. That explains our wax within. He carries his light, his pitch-stained hand, and his little artisan's coil. He is no gentleman amateur who idly scrapes a tune to frighten scholars. He works for his music. We stood for a time, the rain whispering upon the slates like a million conspirators. From somewhere along the mews came the dull step of a constable making his number, and the cry of a cat with a grievance. Holmes listened with his face turned up to the roof, as if the night itself might oblige him with a phrase. "Tell me of your wife, Mr. Markham," he said at length, "and do not abridge what seems trivial." In music, the theme is often hidden in the inner voice. Markham bowed his head. "She was called Eleanor. We met at a private concert in Russell Square, Schubert, if you must know, and were married within the year. She had a fine ear, but no great facility with the instrument. She played for pleasure and for me. After she died, I could not bear to open the trunks where her shawl and stand had been stowed. We had no children. Her people are in Kent. She had few intimates in London, a Mrs. Fleet who kept a small school in Brunswick Place, and a violin maker in Soho who once rehaired my bow as a kindness when we were newly wed, and my purse would not stretch." Holmes's glance struck flint. "Name a Neapolitan, I think. Ferrante? Or Ferraro?" His shop lay off Dean Street down a passage that smelled of glue and lemon oil. "He had the blue papers." Markham's hand fluttered. "Forgive me. It is an odd detail to remember. He wrapped his strings in blue papers stamped with a lyre. Eleanor teased me that the papers were prettier than the music." "Blue," Holmes repeated very softly, as if echoing a note to test a hall. He slipped the E into his pocketbook, as one might file a warrant. "You said the air changed tonight, that it called your name. Did any other person know that device?" "She played it to vex me from my books. I told it to no one." It appears a foolish intimacy when said aloud. "Intimacies are the coin with which villains purchase entry," said Holmes. "Let us go up again. I have one or two little experiments to set, and then, Mr. Markham, you shall sleep, if not well, at least guarded." We returned to the attic. Holmes drew from his pocket a little twist of black silk and a file no bigger than a thimble. He set a hair, plucked, I think, from his own sleeve, across the inner face of the latch so delicately that the merest touch would disturb it, and he smeared with the pad of his finger the faintest film from the file upon the edge of the keyplate. "What is that?" I asked. "A harmless chalk in spirit, my own mixture, which will take the impression of a tool more kindly than brass. If our visitor returns by key or pick, he will sign his name. Now, Mr. Markham, your instrument." I would hear its voice. In the parlor, he took the violin from its cupboard, set it beneath his chin, and drew a tentative stroke. The tone was mellow but veiled, as if the wood still remembered dust. Holmes tuned with quick, economical turns, sniffed the rosin cake in its tin, and then, with a bow scarcely weighted, he sounded the little descending figure our client had described. He let the dominant linger, mar, and then let it fall, come in a cadence that tugged absurdly at the heart. "Yes," said he simply, "I do not require spirits to believe that such a call might draw a man from his bed." But our friend erred when he changed the tune. The first two nights he played a common phrase which any attic might sing. Tonight he identified his intimacy. "That is a gambler's greed, you mean," said Markham, "that he wished to frighten me more, or hurry you to an action he desired, to fetch police, to write to a certain person, to leave the house at a certain hour. Fear is a metronome in clumsy hands. It makes men move too fast. We shall not oblige him. You will remain at home tomorrow, go to your college, and return at your usual hour. Watson and I shall pay a call in Soho among the liars on blue paper, and I will ask Lestrade to bring his official boots to your yard, for there is a certain way a man turns his toes when his childhood taught him different cobbles than ours." "Continental?" I ventured. "If not by birth, then by apprenticeship. The heel mark on your stair showed a narrow tread and a light man. The pitch upon the pipe tells me he is no stranger to roofs. And this," he took again the little coil from his book, "this bears a die I have seen on imported gut from Naples, and never yet upon the cheaper English strings. Our phantom is not a phantom at all, but a hand that has learned its craft among hands like his. There is a guild in London for every trick. He replaced the violin with a care that moved me, as if he were setting down a memory rather than a box of wood, and turned the gas down to a blue seed. At the door he paused, listening to the house as a doctor listens to a chest. "If he returns, Mr. Markham, do not go up. Fear has its uses, but we shall be the ones to play it." The following morning found Holmes in a mood of brisk determination, his breakfast untasted save for coffee, and his violin, usually his solace, untouched upon its stand. He had spent the dawn hours pacing the rug, stopping only to jot a note in his narrow hand and send it by boy to Scotland Yard. When I came down from my room, he greeted me with that peculiar animation, which in him always presaged a morning of inquiry rather than repose. "We shall call at Soho, Watson. The matter of the blue-dyed string admits of no delay. If my suspicion is correct, the hands that trimmed that gut have touched a score of fiddles in London, and their owner is a man who cannot keep his dye to himself. Before that, however, we will verify that Markham's house has not been troubled overnight. A hansom bore us first to Bloomsbury. Markham received us in the hall, pale from a sleepless night, but plainly relieved to see us. "No sound," he said quickly. "Not a note. Your little hair upon the latch, Mr. Holmes, is still undisturbed, and I did not stir from my bed as you instructed." "Excellent. The rat grows cautious," Holmes murmured, "or waits upon daylight. Continue your routine, Mr. Markham. Leave the rest to us." From Coram Street we rattled through the morning traffic, the hansom jolting between carts of fish and barrows of vegetables bound for market. Soho at that hour was already alive with its peculiar medley of odours: coffee, sawdust, damp cloth, and the faint tang of varnish from hidden workshops. Holmes guided the driver with precision until we turned into a narrow passage whose signboard declared Antonio Ferraro, violin maker. The shop was small, its window crowded with instruments that seemed to drowse behind the glass. Within, the air was thick with the sweetness of resin and glue. A man emerged from behind a bench, short, dark, with hands stained to the nails by varnish. He greeted us in a heavily accented English. "Buongiorno, signori. You look for a violin? Or strings, perhaps?" Holmes's eyes flicked over the little packets arranged in a drawer. Each bore a lyre stamped in ink of a peculiar faded blue. He took one up, weighed it, and turned it with quick fingers. "You supply many musicians in London, I think." Holmes said, "All who know good string, signore. From the opera, from the halls. They come here. English string is cheap, but my gut sings. Look." He opened a packet and drew forth a length of gleaming cord, its tint faintly bluish from the dye. It was the twin of what we had found in the attic. Holmes inclined his head. "Most excellent. Tell me, do you sell to all who come, or do you keep a record?" Ferraro laughed. "A record? Musicians pay, they go. Some I know by name, some not. There is one— Ah! He bought much string these weeks, always the E, always in a hurry. Strange fellow. Thin, restless, with the hands of a bird. He comes at night sometimes when I close, and I let him in because he pays. He whistles, always the same air, and I think to myself, this man plays his ghost more than his violin." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A ghost indeed. Did he give a name?" "He said Luigi, but I do not think it true. He asked once if I had wax for a taper. Strange request, no? A player does not ask for wax unless he wishes to work in a place without light." Holmes gave me the barest lift of the eyebrow, enough to confirm the trail was hot. He pressed the man for a description, and Ferraro obliged. Narrow shoulders, hollow cheeks, hair swept back as though often damp, and eyes that darted like a sparrow's. He carried a small case of worn leather, and his accent was Italian, though not pure. He had the look, Ferraro said, of a man who climbed more roofs than stages. When we left the shop, Holmes walked swiftly, his stick clicking against the stones in time with his thoughts. "It is as I feared, Watson. We are dealing not with a mere trespasser, but with a professional of sorts, a musician who has fallen into baser employ. He knows the intimacies of a house, the cadences that draw its master. He trades on grief as others upon gold. To him an attic is but another theatre, and terror his applause." "But why Markham?" I asked. "What purpose is served in haunting him?" "That is the note we have yet to hear," Holmes replied. Markham's name upon the melody was no flourish. It was a summons, an attempt to hasten his step. To what? Perhaps to flee his home, perhaps to seek counsel, or perhaps to drive him into the arms of someone waiting to profit by his fear. We must discover who stands to gain by Markham's disquiet, And that, Watson, is why I have summoned Lestrade. For while we untangle the strings, he may pull at the knots of men who pass ladders through Bloomsbury lanes. At Baker Street, Holmes penned a second note while I set down our findings. He dispatched it with the same boy who had come earlier, then turned to me with the keen satisfaction of a violinist tightening his bow. By tonight, Watson, we may expect another performance. Only this time we shall not sit in the stalls. We shall be behind the curtain, waiting for the player to bow. The afternoon drew on grey and heavy, the kind of London day where the gas lamps must be lit long before the supper hour, and a damp mist clung low to the street like a second skin. Holmes had not so much as sat since our return. He paced the rug, fingers twitching at his lapels, his eyes darting to the window at every sound of wheels below. It was plain he expected Lestrade, and equally plain that the inspector's delay irked him. At last, near 6, the familiar tread ascended the stair, and the inspector entered with his customary blend of briskness and suspicion, as though Holmes's summons might as easily prove a practical joke as a matter of life and death. "You've set me chasing an Italian fiddler this time, have you?" he said, tugging at his gloves. "Your note was thin as gruel, Holmes, but I've had a look round Coram Street as you asked. Nothing out of the ordinary, save that a costermonger swears he saw a ladder being carried through the mews last night near midnight. Couldn't swear to the man. Thin, he said. Plenty of thin men in London." "Plenty," Holmes agreed, his lips curling, "but few who carry resin in their cuffs." "Did your man remark upon the ladder itself?" Lestrade frowned. "Wooden, short, no tradesman's mark. Said it looked as if borrowed, not owned. Why?" "You've a theory already." "I have several," Holmes returned. "One at least will stand when the others fall. Watson and I discovered marks in the yard and pitch on the downpipe. Our fellow climbs well, but not without leaving his scent. He is Italian, at least by trade, and his strings are dyed with Naples blue. He calls himself Luigi to the violin maker Ferraro in Soho, from whom he has purchased more E-strings in a month than a conservatory might use in a season. He whistles an air that once belonged to the late Mrs. Markham, and he has contrived to play it in the attic of her widower's house, though the door was locked and the window barred. Now, Inspector, tell me, is this the behaviour of a harmless itinerant musician, or is it the overture to something graver?" Lestrade's brows climbed. "It has the ring of a tale you'd spin over your pipe, Holmes. Still, I'll not deny you've sniffed out stranger things." "What is it you want from me?" "Only your presence," Holmes replied. "Tonight we shall keep watch at Markham's house. Our phantom will play again. Fear is a trade that demands repetition. I would have you hear the tune with your own ears, lest later you accuse me of embroidering." Lestrade gave a short laugh. "Very well, I'll come, and I'll bring a man to stand in the mews with an eye for ladders. But if I sit all night for the sake of a song, I'll see you drink my whiskey for a month." Holmes waved away the threat with a hand. We left Baker Street soon after, the fog thickening as though eager to cloak our errand. Markham received us with a face drawn tight by expectation. His house seemed to listen with him. The lamps hissed, and every floorboard's creak became portentous. Holmes made us take our stations at once. Lestrade in the small parlour that opened to the yard, Markham upstairs in his room with strict orders not to stir, and I beside Holmes on the landing outside the attic door. The gas was turned low, and Holmes had set his delicate hair trap and chalk anew, his eye gleaming each time he bent to inspect the latch. Hours passed. The fog outside pressed against the panes, and the house ticked like a nervous heart. Markham's clock struck midnight, then the quarter passed, and still we crouched in silence. Holmes was as motionless as stone, save for the minute. Adjustments of his head, as though he were tuning himself to catch a vibration too faint for mortal ears. At length, as the minute hand trembled toward the half-hour, it came, the faintest scrape of bow on string, tentative, as if drawn through gauze. A single phrase followed, clear enough that I felt the hair on my arms rise. It was the very cadence Holmes had played that morning, Mar Kam. Once, twice, lingering like a whisper from the grave. Holmes's eyes flashed in the gloom. He raised a hand for silence, though none of us dared breathe. The melody repeated, a shade bolder, and then shifted into a fall of notes unfamiliar to me, but which made Markham in the room beyond give a muffled gasp. "His wife's air," he whispered, choking on the sound. "It is hers. It cannot be otherwise." Holmes pressed a finger to his lips and signalled Lestrade. who stole like a shadow down toward the yard. The inspector had not been gone a minute when Holmes bent close to my ear. "He is above us, Watson, but not within the attic. Listen, the resonance is too thin. The ceiling itself carries it. Our man sits upon the roof, bowing through the pane. He dares not enter tonight. He suspects a trap. Yet he plays, for the fear must be fed." At that instant, there came a faint rattle from above, the noise of wood scraping slate, followed by the quick patter of feet. Holmes sprang upright. "To the yard!" he cried. We dashed down, Markham stumbling after, just as Lestrade burst through the kitchen door with a curse. A figure had dropped from the roof, lithe as a cat, and was already vanishing over the wall. The inspector lunged but caught only the edge of a sleeve before it tore away. We scrambled into the mews in pursuit, but the fog swallowed all. Only the echo of running feet, then silence. Holmes crouched where the ladder had stood. He lifted from the ground a shred of cloth, coarse and dark, with a single blue thread woven through its seam. He examined it briefly, then slipped it into his pocket. "Our bird is nimble," he said coolly, "but he has left feathers. This is cloth from Naples, I'd swear. He will not evade us long." Lestrade swore under his breath. "Slippery devil. But we'll have his measure. You'll tell me you've already the tune of him, Holmes." "I have more than the tune," Holmes answered. "I have the key in which he plays, and it is a key of extortion. But we must not anticipate the coda, Watson. Come, the night is not yet over, and our phantom has shown his hand. The question now is whose purse guides his bow." We returned into the warmth of Markham's parlour, with the fog still dripping from our coats and the taste of failure in the air. Markham was shaking so violently that Holmes bade him sit and drink a measure of brandy. Lestrade busied himself at the hearth, muttering that his constable in the mews had seen nothing but fog. Holmes alone seemed composed, though I knew the quick glitter in his eyes betrayed a mind turning over the fragments of the night with relentless speed. "Our quarry is clever," Holmes said at last. "He plays not merely upon strings, but upon nerves. Did you mark, Watson, how he never risked the attic itself tonight? The scrape upon the pane told me all. He suspected we waited, so he contented himself with sowing terror from without. That was for us, you see. A performance staged to assure us he exists and yet to withhold his form. He gains in mystery what he loses in boldness." Markham pressed his face in his hands. "Then he will return again and again. I cannot endure it, Mr. Holmes, to hear her voice. No, not hers, but something that apes it. It is a cruelty beyond words. It is cruelty with a purpose," Holmes returned. "And until we know whose hand guides it, the bow will not cease. Consider, our phantom chooses your private heir, one known only to your wife and yourself. How, either through her confidences, to a friend perhaps, or by an intimacy that places him within your household circle. You spoke of a Mrs. Fleet. What of her?" "She is a schoolmistress of music in Brunswick Place," Markham said wearily. "Eleanor would sometimes visit her, but they were not close. Still, she may have heard the air. And yes, there was a pupil, a girl named Alice, who often begged my wife to play it. I thought nothing of it." "Alice was a child of 12. Children grow," said Holmes softly. "And they remember tunes more keenly than lessons. Did this Alice remain with Mrs. Fleet? I cannot say. I lost sight of her after Eleanor's death." Holmes nodded once, sharply. "Lestrade, I require you to find Mrs. Fleet and her pupils of 5 years past." "It will not be wasted labour. Meanwhile, Watson, we must trace the second thread. Our phantom is Italian by trade, or at least by apprenticeship. He has handled varnish, gut and pitch as one bred to it. He purchases his strings from Ferraro, but no man buys without also boasting or cursing. There will be someone in Soho who knows Luigi, or whatever name he wears. That, I think, is our road." Lestrade grumbled that he had constables, not songbirds, but he agreed to make his inquiries. He left near 2 o'clock with the cloth fragment in his pocketbook, promising to compare it with the warehouses along the river where foreign cloth was unshipped. Holmes, for his part, refused rest. He insisted we accompany Markham to his room, where he examined once more the window sash, the sill, and even the soot upon the chimney breast. He found nothing fresh. At last he declared that Markham should sleep if possible, and that we would return at dawn to pursue our inquiries. It was close upon morning when we regained Baker Street. I confess fatigue pressed upon me, but Holmes sat with his violin and drew from it low phrases, not of Markham's air, but of broken scales, fragments that seemed to echo the figure we had heard through the pane. At last he set it aside. "There is a dissonance, Watson. The man plays with skill, yet not with the hand of one who seeks art. He shapes fear, not music. We must learn who profits by that." When I rose late that morning, Holmes was already at the breakfast table with a thin smile and the newspaper folded before him. He tapped a notice with his long finger. "Observe, Watson. A burglary in Great Ormond Street. A house rifled, yet the thief left a single string case upon the sill. It is marked with the lyre of Ferraro. A flourish, no doubt, meant for us. Our phantom grows reckless. He wishes me to follow his tune. And shall you oblige, I asked with pleasure. If he leaves us crumbs of catgut, he invites pursuit. Finish your tea, for we have a walk to Soho once more, and bring your revolver. Men who climb in fog do not always play fair when cornered." We found Ferraro's shop busy with a handful of customers. Holmes waited with ill-concealed impatience until the last had departed, then drew forth the newspaper notice. "Did you hear of this, Ferraro? A string case left behind in Great Ormond Street." Ferraro's face clouded. "I heard, signore. The police asked me this morning. It is my paper, yes, but I did not sell it yesterday. I keep my books, I know. This man, Luigi, he steals packets from me. I miss them, 1, 2, 3 at a time. I say nothing because he pays for others, but he is clever, you see. He takes what he must to leave behind, for a sign, for a joke." Holmes's eyes narrowed. A thief who mocks both his victim and his pursuers. It grows clearer, Watson. We are dealing with a mind that delights in staging. A musician who plays fear as others play notes. The question remains, who is the composer behind his bow? That is the hand we must catch, or else we shall chase ghostly airs until our ears grow dull. We stepped once more into the misted street. Holmes paused, drawing his coat close. He glanced eastward toward Bloomsbury, then south to the river. His face was alive with calculation. "Tonight, Watson, we shall bait our phantom. He cannot resist an audience, and we shall give him one, but on our stage, not his." Holmes's declaration that we would bait the phantom was delivered with such calm certainty that I knew he already heard the shape of the night's performance in his mind. As we walked back toward Baker Street through the fog, he spoke little, save to point out the oddest of details. A slip of paper lodged in a shutter, a man carrying a ladder with no apparent errand, the peculiar way in which a costermonger's whistle matched, in 3 notes, the very cadence that had haunted Markham's attic. It was as if London itself had become an orchestra, and Holmes, with his unerring ear, discerned which instruments were false. Instruments were false. Back in our rooms he paced, sketching quickly upon a sheet of foolscap. He outlined Markham's house in hasty lines, noting the yard, the downpipe, the angle of the attic window. Over this, he drew a second figure, a ladder reaching up to a rooftop, and beneath it a tiny mark shaped like an ear. He tapped the page with his long finger. He plays to frighten Markham, yes, but he also plays to be overheard. We must make him believe his audience is captive, while in truth the stage belongs to us. "You propose a trap in the house itself?" I asked. "In the house, upon the roof, and in the yard," Holmes replied. "Tonight you and I shall be ghosts of our own, silent in the attic. Lestrade and his constable will wait in the mews. Markham must do his part. He will lie in bed, a lamp lit faintly at his table so that our phantom believes him roused by fear but too timid to leave his chamber. It will tempt him to risk more to enter rather than play at a distance, and if he does not, then we shall still gain knowledge. The very manner of his approach, whether he climbs, whether he lingers, whether he plays or withdraws, each is a note in his composition. By dawn we shall know the theme entire. The afternoon passed in restless preparation. Holmes vanished for an hour and returned with a coil of thin cord, 2 small lanterns hooded in tin, and a length of netting folded under his arm. When I raised my brows, he merely said, "A violinist is nothing without strings." That evening we dined early, and by 10 we were once more at Coram Street, where Markham awaited us with a face pale as parchment. "He has not returned since last night," he whispered. yet every sound seems to me a bow upon string. Even the ticking of my clock. Holmes placed a hand upon his shoulder. Courage, Mr. Markham. Tonight you are not alone in your orchestra box. Remember only this. No matter what you hear, you are to remain in your room. The music is for us now. By 11:30 we were in position. Holmes and I crouched in the dust of the attic, the boards cold beneath us, the hooded lantern between our knees. Through a slit he had made in the shutter, Holmes watched the sloping roof outside. The cord was tied from his hand to the latch of the attic door, so that even the faintest movement might be felt. The net lay folded at the sill, a spider's web awaiting its prey. Below, the faint gleam of Markham's lamp seeped through the floorboards, a signal of supposed weakness to any watching eye. The silence grew deep, the kind that seems to magnify every breath. My ears strained until I fancied I could hear the mist moving across the panes. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the scrape of a bow. One phrase hesitant, like the testing of a throat. Another firmer. The familiar, cruel cadence, Markham drawn out with a ghostly tenderness. Holmes's fingers tightened on the cord. Not the pain tonight. Listen from the roof beam above. He is daring more. The music swelled, soft but insistent, the notes sinking through the rafters as though the house itself had become an instrument. Then came a new sound, the faint grating of a tool upon metal. The window latch. Holmes's eyes blazed in the dim glow. He comes in, Watson. Steady. A shape darkened the slit. Thin, wiry, with a shock of hair pressed flat by the damp. A hand slid inside, pale against the black, and the latch lifted. Slowly, almost reverently, the window opened inward and the figure slipped into the attic. He carried no lantern, only the violin case at his side and a taper stub clenched in his teeth, its faint glow casting a ghastly half-light upon his face. Holmes sprang like a coiled spring. The net flew wide, enveloping the intruder before he could cry out. He struggled with surprising ferocity, the case clattering to the floor, the taper extinguished. I threw my weight upon the man's arms, while Holmes twisted the cord tight around the bundle. Within moments the phantom was subdued, panting like a trapped animal. Holmes struck the lantern alight. The light revealed a narrow face, hollow cheeks and eyes that darted with desperate fire. It was the very description Ferraro had given us, Luigi or whatever name he bore. The man hissed in a thick accent, "You have no right. I play only what is mine. Yours?" Holmes said with icy calm. "You play upon grief, sir, and upon terror. That is no man's to claim." At that instant footsteps thundered up the stair and Lestrade burst in, revolver in hand. "Got him, have you?" he cried. "By thunder, Holmes, you're a devil for nets." The prisoner glared but said nothing. Holmes bent to the fallen case and opened it. Inside lay a violin, cheap, battered, its bridge warped but strung with strings of that unmistakable Naples blue. Holmes lifted one with a fingertip and let it twang. "A poor instrument for noble music," he murmured, yet enough to carry fear into the heart of a grieving man. Markham had followed in trembling steps, and when he beheld the scene he turned deathly white. "That face, I have seen it, yes, years ago, in my wife's company. He was a pupil of Mrs. Fleet's, a lad she dismissed for insolence. Eleanor pitied him once, lent him coins for lessons. That he should, oh God, that he should profane her song." Holmes's gaze sharpened, so a cast-off pupil turned trickster and tormentor. "Yet I think, Watson, that he is not the sole hand here. A poor Italian with a cheap fiddle does not contrive extortion alone. He is but the bow. We must find the hand that draws it." Lestrade's men dragged the captive away, still muttering in Italian, while Holmes watched with the cold satisfaction of one who has seized but a single thread of a larger knot. When the house was quiet again, he turned to me, his eyes alight with grim resolve. "Tonight we caught the phantom who played. Tomorrow, Watson, we must discover who composed the tune." The dawn was pale and cold when Holmes and I returned to Baker Street, our captive safely deposited in Lestrade's charge. The streets lay washed with fog like a damp sheet drawn over the city, and the hansom wheels splashed quietly through puddles as we rode. Holmes was sunk deep into thought, his chin pressed against his chest, his long fingers tapping the line of his knee in a silent rhythm. I knew better than to interrupt him, for when his mind moved in such intricate measures, it was as though the world outside scarcely existed. Only when we had settled into our chairs by the fire did he stir, his eyes bright with that peculiar flame which burned at its fiercest after a sleepless night. You perceive, Watson, he said, that the capture of Luigi, if such be his name, is but the opening bar of this symphony. A bow cannot play without a hand to draw it, and a hand does not labor without a score placed before it. Our prisoner is the bow, pliant, responsive, but ultimately controlled. The question is, who set the music before him? I reminded him of Markham's recognition that the man had once been a pupil of Mrs. Fleet, and that Eleanor had shown him kindness. Surely resentment alone might spur a man to cruelty, I suggested. Holmes shook his head. Resentment may explain malice, but not method. Luigi displayed a cunning far beyond the wounded pride of a failed pupil. He knew precisely the tune to use and the hour to play it. He brought with him ladders, wax and resin, contrived false locks, and even staged burglaries to leave Ferraro's blue packets as his calling card. Such orchestration is not born in the mind of a street fiddler. No, Watson, he is but a performer, recruited for his skill and his desperation. Holmes reached for the morning paper which Lestrade had pressed into his hand at the station and spread it across his knee. Here is the harmony, Watson. The burglary in Great Ormond Street, the one where the lyre-marked packet was left, was not a theft of chance. Look at what the thief carried off. Documents, bonds, and letters from the desk of a certain solicitor who manages estates in Bloomsbury. That solicitor is none other than the agent for Mr. Markham's late wife's family. A curious convergence, is it not? I started. Then the motive is inheritance. Holmes gave a satisfied smile. At last, Watson, you begin to hear the tune. Suppose Eleanor Markham possessed a modest fortune or property, held in trust until some condition was fulfilled. Suppose further that her widower stands to inherit unless some artifice persuades him to relinquish his claim, to flee his house, or to appear unfit. What better way than to unman him with nightly visitations until his reason seems doubtful or his courage fails? But who would benefit? That is the crescendo yet to come. The family in Kent, perhaps, a relative with debts, a cousin eager for land, or the solicitor himself, with access to the accounts and the ingenuity to employ a phantom fiddler. Luigi supplies the terror, but another supplies the purse. We must now learn which hand profits from Markham's ruin. Holmes rose suddenly, his weariness forgotten, and took up his hat. We shall begin with Mrs. Fleet. A music school is a convenient place to glean confidences. Children repeat what their elders whisper, and governesses see more than they are told. If Luigi once belonged to her circle, she may reveal whose interest has lately revived in his company. By mid-morning we were in Brunswick Place, where Mrs. Fleet's modest establishment occupied a narrow house with lace curtains in the windows, and the faint sound of scales drifting from within. She received us in a parlour crowded with sheet music and the smell of polished wood. She was a spare woman with greying hair drawn tightly back and a look of perpetual fatigue, as though generations of reluctant pupils had worn upon her spirit. Holmes presented himself as one seeking information on behalf of a former patron, and within moments had turned the conversation to her pupils of 5 years past. At the mention of Luigi, her brows drew together. A troublesome boy, she said. He had talent but no discipline, insolent, quick to anger. I dismissed him after he insulted a visiting patron. Mrs. Markham, dear Eleanor, spoke kindly of him, but kindness was wasted there. He fell into disrepute, and I heard no more of him. And the other pupils? Holmes asked. Did any maintain a friendship with him? She hesitated, then gave a small nod. There was one. A young gentleman who sometimes came to observe, though he was too old to be my pupil. He was cousin to Mrs. Markham, I believe, Henry Gale. He fancied himself a patron of the arts, though he had little ear and less patience. He was extravagant, always in debt, and thought Luigi amusing. I warned him it would end ill. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Henry Gale, you say? From Kent, indeed. He stayed with his aunt in Russell Square for a time. I believe he pressed Eleanor for money on occasion. She never spoke of it to me, but I could see her distress. After her death, he ceased his visits. Holmes inclined his head with grave courtesy. You have been most helpful, madam. You may have saved a man's peace of mind. As we walked away, Holmes allowed himself a short burst of satisfaction. There, Watson, is our composer, a cousin profligate and desperate, with just enough knowledge of Eleanor's heir to set Luigi upon his scheme. He had motive, debts, means Luigi, and opportunity, access to the family's affairs through the solicitor. Now we must catch him in the act of conducting. And how shall we do that? Holmes's smile was thin as a blade. By letting him believe his music still plays, Luigi will hold his tongue only so long as he thinks his master's purse may yet redeem him. If Gale dares to visit him at the yard, we shall have our proof. If not, we must draw him to Markham's house by another note. Either way, Watson, the finale approaches. Tonight we prepare for the coda of this curious symphony. Holmes wasted no time upon return to Baker Street. He sent a note by hand to Lestrade, instructing that Luigi be kept under the closest watch, but without public charge, and that any visitor who sought him should be observed discreetly. When I asked if Gale would indeed be so incautious, Holmes replied that men driven by debt and arrogance are ever the most incautious. Luigi was no more to him than a pawn. If that pawn threatened to betray him, Gale's hand would be forced. Our task was to give him the confidence that his scheme still lived, so that he might come to steady it. Holmes spent the afternoon with his violin across his knee, though he did not play. Instead, he tapped the bow upon the wood, each stroke sharp like a conductor marking time. He spoke of Gale's character with growing precision, as if each deduction struck out a beat. A cousin who pressed Eleanor for money, whose debts multiplied with every season, whose knowledge of her private heir made Luigi's nightly torment possible. It was a portrait growing more vivid by the hour, and I confess my impatience to see the man's guilt grew almost intolerable. By evening, Lestrade arrived, his face alight with the grim satisfaction of a policeman who has at last glimpsed the shape of the net. He had set men to watch Luigi's cell, and sure enough, shortly after dusk, a visitor had attempted to gain admittance under the pretense of being his solicitor. He was refused, but his description, tall, thin, with an extravagant coat and a restless manner, matched Mrs. Fleet's account of Henry Gale. Holmes's eyes shone. Excellent. He will not rest content with refusal. He will attempt to reach Luigi by other means. A letter, perhaps, or a message carried. Our task is to intercept that communication and turn it to our own ends. Indeed, no sooner had Lestrade returned to the yard than word was sent that a note had been delivered to Luigi, hidden in the heel of a loaf brought by a boy. The writing was clumsy, disguised with left-handed strokes, but the sense was plain enough. Hold your tongue and you shall be freed. Play no more till I give the word. Luigi, suspecting nothing, had torn the note and thrust it under his blanket. Where it was discovered by the warder at Lestrade's instruction, Holmes examined the fragments with a lens when they were brought to him. The paper is of a quality seldom found in the pockets of errand boys, he observed. Laid stock, faint watermark, a Kentish mill. The ink, however, is cheap, the sort bought in stationers' shops by the dozen. A man of pretension in reduced means. It is our Gale to the life. The question, Holmes continued, is how to draw him into the open before he flees. His first attempt has failed. He will be driven to his last. He must seek to secure Markham's ruin before Luigi can betray him. Therefore, tonight we return to Coram Street. There he will come, and there we shall await him. We set out after supper, the mist hanging thicker than before, and by 10 we were again in Markham's parlour. Holmes instructed our client with grave patience. You must feign unease, sir, as though you have reached the limit of endurance. Leave a lamp burning late. Scatter some papers upon your desk as though preparing to leave your affairs in disorder. If Gale comes, it will be to urge you toward flight or surrender. We shall hear his words, and they will damn him. Markham, though trembling, agreed. We concealed ourselves in the adjoining room, the door left ajar a finger's width. The house fell into silence, broken only by the ticking of the hall clock. The hours crept by, and I began to fear Gale had scented the trap. Yet at 1:45, there came the faint creak of the front gate, the cautious turn of a key in the lock, and the whisper of a step upon the stair. Markham's breath caught audibly, but he mastered himself. The door to his study opened, and through the narrow slit we beheld a figure slip inside. The lamplight showed a man of elegant bearing gone shabby, a coat too fine for his purse, gloves worn at the seams, and eyes darting with nervous calculation. He greeted Markham in a low, urgent tone. My dear cousin, you look ill indeed. This house has become a prison for you. I warned you it was not wise to linger among memories. Better to return to Kent, leave the place to rest. What is a house compared with peace of mind? Markham, coached by Holmes, replied faintly that the nightly torments had indeed shaken him, that he thought of abandoning the place altogether. The visitor pressed closer. Yes, yes, go, leave it. I can see to the affairs here. Arrange matters with the solicitor. You should think only of your health. Sign this, merely a power of attorney, and you shall be free of all care. Holmes's hand closed on my arm like steel. That, Watson, is our cadenza. He flung wide the door, and in an instant the room was ablaze with his presence. The false cousin started back, his face blanching, the papers in his hand trembling. "Henry Gale," said Holmes with cutting clarity, "your concert is over. You employed Luigi to haunt this house, to unman your cousin, to drive him into your hands. You provided him with the tune, the wax, the means of entrance, and you sought to profit from his terror. The liar on Ferraro's packets, the blue-dyed strings, the burglary in Great Ormond Street, all are but the notes in your score. And now, caught in the act of extracting a signature by fraud, you stand revealed." Gale's protest died upon his lips as Lestrade, who had entered behind us, laid a heavy hand upon his shoulder. The inspector's grin was hard. "You've played your last fiddle, sir. You'll find the law less forgiving than your cousin's patience." Markham sagged in his chair, the colour returning slowly to his face. Holmes gathered the scattered papers, glanced through them, and handed them to Lestrade. "These, I think, will prove sufficient. Yet for all the notes we have heard, one still lingers unanswered. What price Luigi set upon his bow, and how many such tunes he has played for desperate men. That, Inspector, you may learn in your own key." As Gale was led away protesting his innocence in a flood of words, Holmes turned to me with the faintest of smiles. "The symphony, Watson, has reached its finale. Yet I fancy there remains an epilogue, a softer strain. When our friend Mr. Markham sleeps at last without fear of his attic." Markham's relief at the arrest of his cousin was so profound that he could scarcely speak. He pressed Holmes's hand with both of his own, tears standing in his eyes, and whispered only that he owed his sanity, perhaps his very life, to our intervention. Holmes, who has never borne gratitude well, inclined his head with the briefest of acknowledgments and urged him to rest. When at last the poor fellow had gone to his chamber, Holmes lingered by the window, staring out into the fog as though listening for some remnant of the phantom melody that had tormented the house. Lestrade busied himself with his prisoner, who was conveyed in due course to the yard. The clatter of carriage wheels faded, leaving the house quiet once more. I confess to feeling a strange unease even in victory. The rooms, with their silent instruments and the shadowed corners of the attic above, still seemed to harbour echoes of the bow. When I voiced this, Holmes gave a thin smile. "You are not alone, Watson. Music leaves its trace long after the player has ceased. But this house shall not hear that strain again." The following day we were summoned to the yard to provide our statements. Luigi sat glowering in his cell, his wiry figure hunched like a bird of prey with broken wings. He refused to meet our gaze, muttering to himself in Italian. Lestrade informed us that he had at first denied all knowledge of Gale, but when pressed with the fragments of the letter concealed in the loaf, his nerve faltered. He admitted to having been paid handsomely to play the nightly serenades, to carry ladders and wax, and to follow the instructions left for him at appointed taverns. Gale had promised him eventual passage back to Naples, where his debts and petty thefts in London would not pursue him. Holmes examined him through the bars with a detached curiosity. "You see, Watson, the bow indeed. Flexible, responsive, yet incapable of composing a note of his own. He would have played for any master who paid him, whether the tune was lament or jig. It is a sordid comfort, but it exonerates him of the craft behind the crime. And Gale?" I asked. "What of his punishment?" "The law will pursue him with vigor," Holmes replied. "Attempted fraud, conspiracy, intimidation. Lestrade will see to the charge sheet. But do not think his vanity will wither quietly. He will protest, he will cry innocence, he will plead debts and desperation. Yet the evidence is a fugue too tightly woven for him to unravel." As we left the yard, Holmes paused upon the steps and drew in the damp air with something like satisfaction. "You remarked upon unease last night, Watson. I too felt it. But this morning the air is clearer. Evil has been unmasked, and the tune that haunted Bloomsbury is silenced." We returned to Baker Street, where for the first time in days Holmes allowed himself true repose. He sank into his armchair, clasped his hands, and closed his eyes. For several hours he remained thus, motionless save for the rise and fall of his breath, as though he were a violin placed back into its case, its strings slackened after performance. I wrote up my notes of the affair, but even as I set pen to paper, I was struck by the strangeness of it. A crime composed not of daggers or pistols, but of melody. Not of blood spilled, but of reason undermined. That evening, as we sat to supper, Markham himself was announced. He looked 10 years younger for a single night of unbroken rest. His gratitude was deep, but he spoke with restraint, as though the very memory of his ordeal must be handled delicately, like a fragile score. He told us that he had resolved to leave the house for a time, not in flight but in peace, to spend a season in the country until the air of Bloomsbury no longer reminded him of terror. He asked Holmes if he thought such a course wise. Holmes regarded him with grave kindness. "Sir, there is no shame in seeking silence after discord. Yet know this, the phantom you feared was flesh and blood, and he is gone. No echo can harm you now. Your wife's melody belongs to your memory, not to the hands of rogues. If you hear it again, let it be of your own playing, not of theirs." Markham bowed his head, visibly moved, and promised he would do so. When he departed, Holmes turned to me with that rare softness which came only after the completion of a case. "It is curious, Watson, how often men seek to turn the instruments of beauty to the service of cruelty. A tune meant as jest between husband and wife, stolen and twisted to a weapon of fear. Such perversions are uglier to me than the crudest crimes of violence. You speak as though music itself had been wounded," I remarked. Holmes's lips curved faintly. "Perhaps it has. Yet in unmasking such men we restore in some measure its rightful harmony." For a time we sat in silence, the lamps casting their mellow glow upon the books and bottles of our sitting room. Then Holmes rose, took up his violin, and drew the bow across the strings. No ghostly cadence this time, no cruel mimicry, but a rich, sonorous phrase of Bach, steady and noble. The sound filled the room, and I felt the last remnants of the phantom's presence fall away. As the final chord lingered, Holmes lowered the instrument and looked toward the window where the city lay shrouded in fog. "There will always be those who play upon the weaknesses of men, Watson. Our task is to remind the world that such notes cannot endure. Truth, once heard, is the stronger music." And with that he set the violin gently aside, drew his dressing gown about him, and reached for his pipe. The case of the violin that sang in the attic had ended. Not with a shot or a cry, but with a silence restored. And in that silence, London seemed for one fleeting moment to breathe more easily. The case might well have ended with Gale in custody and Markham restored to peace, yet Holmes remained strangely unsettled. In the days that followed he was quieter than usual, taking little interest even in his chemical experiments. He smoked incessantly, pacing the carpet until the nap was worn thin, and though no client's knock disturbed our door, his mind was plainly still fixed upon Coram Street. I observed as much one evening when he paused at the window, his silhouette cut against the drifting fog. "You are dissatisfied, Holmes, and yet the culprit is in Lestrade's hands. The victim is safe and the chain of reasoning complete. What chord still jars in your ear?" He turned, his expression distant. "Satisfaction, Watson, is a luxury I cannot claim until every dissonance resolves. You recall the burglary in Great Ormond Street, where papers were taken and a blue string left? Those papers concerned not only Markham's inheritance, but certain securities tied to Gale's debts. Very good. Yet consider why the charade of music at all. If Gale merely sought to ruin his cousin, documents and false signatures would suffice. Why expend effort upon nightly serenades from the roof? To unman Markham, surely, I said. To weaken his mind until he would sign anything. Holmes shook his head slowly. Fear is a blunt tool. Gale was not clever enough to employ it so artfully. No, Watson, there was another intelligence at work, one that saw in music the perfect instrument of coercion. Gale provided motive, Luigi provided skill, but I suspect a third hand guided both. I was about to protest when Mrs. Hudson entered with a note delivered by special messenger. Holmes slit it open, scanned the contents, and gave a short laugh without mirth. It was from Lestrade. Gale, confined at the Yard, had attempted to send another letter, this one to a solicitor in Russell Square. The message, though clumsily disguised, implored that arrangements proceed as agreed, and that Ferraro must not speak. Holmes handed me the note. "Do you perceive it, Watson? The web tightens. Gale feared Ferraro might reveal too much. The violin maker has more to answer for than a few stolen packets. Tomorrow we pay him another visit." We went at once the next morning. Ferraro greeted us with his usual oily affability, But there was a tremor about his hands as he unwrapped a bundle of gut strings before us. Holmes wasted no pleasantries. You supplied Luigi not only with strings, but with instruction. You knew whose tune he played and why. Gale trusted you as the middleman, did he not? Ferraro paled, stammering denials, but Holmes pressed on mercilessly, his words like hammer blows. You gave him the wax for his tapers, the die that marked his strings and the packets to leave as signatures of his work. Without you, the scheme could not have flourished. You fancied yourself safe, hidden behind your counter, but Gale has already betrayed you. He writes from his cell to silence you. The man collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He confessed in broken English that Gale had come to him months before, desperate for funds. Ferraro had lent money at usurious rates, and when repayment failed, Gale proposed a scheme to frighten his cousin from his inheritance. Ferraro, sensing profit, suggested music as the weapon, and Luigi, once his apprentice, was summoned to perform it. The violin maker admitted to crafting false keys and to marking the packets that served as Luigi's taunt. He insisted he never meant for harm, only for payment. Holmes regarded him with cold disdain. You sought to play impresario to a tragedy, sir, and like many who dabble in orchestration, you misjudged the audience. The law will now conduct the finale. We left Ferraro in Lestrade's capable hands. As we walked back through the crowded streets of Soho, Holmes's mood lightened perceptibly. The dissonance has resolved, Watson. Gale was the motive, Luigi the performer, but Ferraro the composer. Each note now accounted for. The symphony is complete. Symphony is complete. That evening, as we sat once more in Baker Street, I ventured to reflect upon the case. It was unlike any we had encountered. No blood upon the carpet, no dagger thrust in the dark, but terror conjured from melody, inheritance threatened by tune and bow. Holmes listened with half a smile, his gaze distant. You see, Watson, crime ever seeks novelty, just as art does. A dagger grows dull, a pistol too commonplace. But a violin in an attic, that strikes the imagination and therefore the nerves. Yet it is the same old story beneath: greed, debt, and betrayal. He took up his violin, then tuned it with care, and played the air that had once tormented poor Markham. But in Holmes's hands it was transformed. No longer a whispering ghost, but a clear, steady line, touched with sorrow yet free of malice. When the final note faded, he lowered the bow and looked at me with rare gentleness. Thus, Watson, we restore harmony. A melody once stolen is returned to its rightful key. The case of the violin that sang in the attic is ended, and I, watching the smoke curl from his pipe as the city settled into its restless night, could not help but marvel once more at the strange genius of my friend, that he alone could take the discord of men's schemes and resolve them into truth as surely as any musician resolves a symphony into its final, triumphant chord. Holmes remained by the fire long after I had set down the last lines of my notes. The case, though resolved in all its particulars, still seemed to linger about him like the echo of a chord that will not quite fade. At length he spoke, his voice low and deliberate, as if addressing not me alone but the air itself. You see, Watson, how frail is the veil between beauty and cruelty. A violin, meant to soothe or to delight, became in lesser hands an instrument of terror. Gale and Ferraro sought to turn harmony into dissonance, and Luigi, poor pliant Luigi, bowed to their will. Yet in truth the melody was never theirs. It belonged to Eleanor Markham, and through her to her husband's memory. By exposing their deception we have given it back. I could not help but agree, though I reminded him that even Luigi's part had been played with skill enough to deceive us for a time. Holmes's smile was fleeting, touched with irony. The smallest player may confound an audience, Watson, but only while the conductor's hand is unseen. Once the score is revealed, the illusion crumbles. News of the trial spread quickly. Gale, confronted with Ferraro's testimony and the damning evidence of the forged papers, collapsed into abject confession. He was sentenced with little mercy, his name thereafter synonymous with disgrace. Ferraro, stripped of his shop and reputation, fared no better, though his punishment was tempered by his cooperation. Luigi, deported to Italy, vanished from London's streets like a note carried away on the wind. Markham wrote to us from the countryside some weeks later. His letter, penned in a steadier hand than when first he came to us, spoke of peace. He had taken out his violin again and played Eleanor's little air beneath a spring sky. It had not brought terror but comfort. and he thanked Holmes with a gratitude so heartfelt that even my companion could not dismiss it entirely. When I read the letter aloud, Holmes took it without comment and placed it carefully within a drawer of his desk. Then, reaching for his own instrument, he drew the bow across the strings and let fall a phrase of quiet dignity. It was not Eleanor's air, nor Bach's solemn harmonies, but a gentle improvisation of his own, rising and falling like breath itself. As the notes faded into silence, he turned to me. "We have resolved the case, Watson. Yet remember this, men may twist truth, they may pervert music, they may darken even memory, but the harmony endures. Our task, yours and mine, is only to bring it once more into the light." I could find no better answer than to sit in silence beside him, the fire crackling softly, the city's restless murmur beyond our window. Thus ended the strange affair of the violin that sang in the attic, an affair of ghosts that were no ghosts, of music turned against its purpose, and of truth restored at last by the steady hand and unerring ear of Sherlock Holmes.